Welcome to DonorConnect, Nonprofit Resilience as we face the future. The reason we host DonorConnects is a main part of our mission at the Community Foundation, to connect donors to causes that you care about. And thank you for being a part of the discussion today. Over the past year, our local nonprofits have stepped up and leaned in to meet our community in the face of tremendous challenges. While so much has changed over the past year, what remained constant was our commitment to addressing each hurdle with the belief that we are better together. Now I'd like to introduce Angie Deflis-Trenton, our Chief Community Impact Officer, to lead our discussion. And as a reminder, you can post the questions in the chat feature, and we'll have time for those towards the end of our discussion. And if we don't get to them, I will have you followed up with. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sarah. And I just want to reiterate her appreciation to all of you for joining us today. As you were all gathering, I don't know if you heard the song that was playing, but the chorus was "We Rise Up," and boy, I got a few goosebumps as I was listening to that and seeing the pictures of the speakers who are joining me today. I think that is exactly what we saw each and every one of them and their organizations do, and for that, I know that I am eternally grateful, as is the Community Foundation. So thanks again for joining us. I'm very excited to welcome to this conversation, and I'll invite them to turn on their videos rather, and want to introduce you to incredible colleagues who are going to be a part of the conversation today. First, we have Dawn Martinez Oropeza, who is the Executive Director of Alexito. Alexito is an organization that is committed to advancing Iowa's prosperity through Latinx excellence, focusing on inspiring, preparing, and supporting primarily middle school to college age students. But really, this organization is one that continues to lean in on critical issues. And Dawn is such an incredible advocate and voice in our community. So grateful to have her a part of the conversation today. We also have Trey Wade, who serves as the president and CEO of Every Step, which is an organization that has more than 32 different programs. So what you thought you knew about Every Step, there's a lot more to all that they do throughout our community. And their programs really focus on healthcare and support centered around compassion and guidance. They have programs that are related to end-of-life care, to in-home visiting nurse services. They serve more than 67,000 individuals a year. Trey's leadership has been transformational, and not just for Every Step as an organization, but really for others in the field. So glad to have Trey a part of the conversation today. We also have Suzanne Minnick with us, who serves as the president of the Mid-Iowa Health Foundation, which is a local private foundation in central Iowa that works to be a catalyst and partner focused on improving health for the most vulnerable neighbors that we have here in Greater Des Moines. From launching a health fellowship-based program to elevating critical conversations around the importance of the social determinants of health for kids in our community, Suzanne is tirelessly committed to accelerating action to support our community's most pressing health needs. Suzanne is one who inspires, challenges, and simply makes good things happen. So glad to have Suzanne with us as well. Next, we have Renee Miller, and Renee serves as the Chief Community Impact Officer with the United Way of Central Iowa. In this role, she leads the entire investment strategy and approach for United Way's new evolved strategy that has been recently announced, which is about fostering an equitable, engaged, and empowered community. So this new renewed approach for United Way has 5 focus areas: economic opportunity, education success, health and well-being, early childhood success, and essential needs. Renee's voice, and I'm sure many of you have had an opportunity to get to know her and their work, that her voice and her perspective has truly helped to bridge countless gaps and inspire countless community solutions. And last but certainly not least, we also have joining us Isaiah Knox, who serves as the Executive Director for Urban Dreams and is also a fellow Social Capital Chair for Capital Crossroads. Isaiah works tirelessly again. There's probably a better word I should be using, Isaiah. I'm sorry, but he works tirelessly to elevate and live out Urban Dreams mission, which is to advocate for all members of our community, breaking down barriers to success and collaborating with stakeholders to overcome those obstacles and uplift underserved and underrepresented individuals. Isaiah's focus, commitment, personally and professionally, to advancing equity has made our community stronger and continues to challenge each and every one of us, including myself. And Isaiah is also a board member of the Community Foundation. So with that, thanks again, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to give a little bit of background on all of the colleagues that we have on the screen here today. It's truly an honor. So over the past year, I have had an opportunity to work with each and every one of these wonderful individuals. And as I said to them this morning as we gathered, it has been an honor, a blessing, and a true inspiration over the past year, because it's been a hard year. No matter how we've approached the past year, it has been difficult. And leaning on really smart, really passionate and committed people to help you navigate has been critically important. But I've also found myself at times struggling to really believe that it has just been a year. Sometimes it feels like a much shorter period of time, and other times it feels like it's been a decade. And I wanted to just start our conversation this morning with asking each of you to reflect on that moment or that instance or that one conversation where the rumbling of this word corona something, when you realized that this was going to be a significant challenge in our community. What was that moment when you realized this was something huge?
I can go first because I remember it very well. We had a group of students. We were in Minnesota, in St. Paul, and during spring break, we were preparing for, we had about 4 weekends worth of presentations lined up that we were going to practice. We were going to meet with a Native American group and another community leader, and things just kept shutting down, like, oh, this group isn't going to meet with you. This group isn't going to meet with you. Mall of America is closing, and I just needed to know what to do with my students and make sure that they were safe. So it was a lot of being on my phone and checking on things and figuring ways to get back and make sure that they were safe. And so remember it very well.
Wow, and to be away from home when that came about, it sort of was in your face with sort of this ripple effect that you were experiencing. I'm guessing some of you might have had a similar moment where you were just kind of inundated with some of those closures or things. How about for the others?
I think for me, 2 things come to mind. One, it's somewhat similar. We were actually getting ready to take a trip, my family and another family. And suddenly it dawned on us literally 2 days before we were supposed to fly out of the country that we better start having conversation about what if we get there and we can't get back? What if we get there and they won't let us leave the airport? And should we cancel and do all the things that go with canceling a trip within 24 hours when you were supposed to be on a plane? So that certainly made it very real. And then I think the other thing from a local perspective is I'm fortunate enough to be on the board at Dallas County Hospital. And if you all remember, that was the first positive test we had in Iowa. And I can remember being out with my family and getting a very late call from the executive director up there and just, thinking this is very odd that she'd be calling me at, 10:30 at night. And it was to let me know they've had a positive test, someone who's symptomatic, and they were having to put things in place to really make sure that their staff, the other patients, were safe. And of course, so much was unknown then. And just being it dawned on me then just how serious and really scary this was for local healthcare and human service providers who were trying to help people.
I think I can probably pivot right off of that. So personally, my spouse is a physician, and so he had been watching very carefully globally how this is unfolding in many conversations within the health systems. But then to watch, and you start seeing things close down, as the others have mentioned, and then to watch literally overnight our health systems shut down, transform. I remember those, it was like a progressive conversation that all of a sudden then the world is different today.
Yeah, mine was similar to what, Suzanne and Trey were just describing. While this was unlike any other disaster we had faced, I knew really quickly that it was going to require us to come together in a time of crisis. And the moment for me was we received an urgent phone call from Iowa Department of Public Health with a request to activate our 211 system as the COVID hotline. And at the time, the first COVID case had not even been announced or made public in Iowa. And you could distinctly hear the urgency in their voice. And they made it very clear that we were preparing for something significant and that they needed kind of all hands on deck. And so that was the turning moment for me personally and professionally to really, the light was bright that we were heading into something we had never experienced before.
Mine was similar. It was progressive though over time. We were in Cedar Rapids, actually opening up, meeting with them at City Hall, and we started to have the conversation, should we be meeting in person? And then by the time we got back from Cedar Rapids to Des Moines, we were having the same conversations. And I also went to Minneapolis during spring break for a vacation, cut that short, came back and sat down with the staff and said, do you guys want to go home or do you want to stay open? And overwhelmingly the staff said, we want to stay open. So starting to roll into what the safety measures were for that. And then obviously my wife's in healthcare as well. So figuring out what do we need to do to keep the staff as safe and healthy as possible while we're still staying open during this time. So it was progressive over about 3 or 4 days of really fast pivoting on making some crucial decisions on how we were going to stay available for people in our neighborhood.
Boy, when I was thinking about this too, it's like the whole condensed timeline in which you sort of created this plan. I mean, you can have disaster plans, you can have approaches for remote work needs for a variety of things, but the complexities that the pandemic brought and the widespread impact, and for many, this turning around on less than a day, strategies to do mission work in a brand new way. Everything had to be kicked into high gear, as you were kind of talking about. So curious, how as nonprofit leaders, what was the first step that you took to really address some of that uncertainty, or how did you handle some of those what ifs? What was your first move in trying to stabilize and continue your work in the community?
Yeah, I would start by echoing something that Isaiah just said. It was, we recognize since our first, our natural tendency is to think about the community and what are we going to do for the community. But this was a moment in time where we had to pause for a moment to say, how are we going to ensure our own staff are safe and healthy so that we can be positioned to respond to the community? And I think that for us was something really very different than we had experienced ever in the past. It's usually if crisis hits, if something happens in the community, we just, we go into full action. But we had to pause for a minute and say, how are we going to do this in a way that's meaningful, that keeps everyone safe and healthy? And of course, how are we as partners in the community going to come together and collectively make sure that we are all communicating and collaborating in a way that's going to be most effective for the response? And I think as an organization, we also took a moment to try to identify what was our role going to be. And, for us, one of the main things, of course, was, as I already mentioned, with the 211 hotline, but it was also the conversations, Angie, that, we had with you about how do we take what we've started to build in terms of a recovery plan and activate that really quickly. And so it was a lot, obviously a lot of moving pieces, but I think something that was different was really having to be more introspective and think about what were we going to do for our teams to make sure that we could be ready for the community.
And I know everyone's incredibly tired of Zoom now and virtual meetings, but I will say the silver lining of this was that almost instantly community partners and community went into high communication mode. And so it was, while exhausting from dawn till dusk and then beyond, nonstop virtual meetings, small groups, large groups, one-on-one conversations, and that instantly went into play, and trying to learn from each other, support one another, gather knowledge. And so I think those were some of the first things we started doing, but only because everyone else stepped up and did the same thing. You weren't having to like try and pull people together. People were making things move and happen and convening the groups that they needed to convene to protect and serve the community.
Yeah, I think the first step we had, we were fortunate. We have a lot of internal expertise. I mean, we work in, across those 30 programs. We have a lot of public health programs. We have a medical director. We have nurses on staff. So the first thing we did was kind of pull a group together that had some expertise and engage with them and create a committee that was meeting daily, sometimes twice a day. And for us, what we had to do is figure out, almost all our programs are community based. And so, which ones would need to pivot and try to do things in a different way. And frankly, which ones were a little more, you couldn't pivot. I mean, we have hospice and home care programs where people who are very fragile are expecting our nurses to show up regardless of rain, shine, or a pandemic, and trying to figure out, okay, now what do we need to do to first sort through the programs, and then those programs where we just got to keep on keeping on. How can we keep those staff and those patients and families safe as we're still going into the community and trying to do what we do?
Trey makes a really good point there. A lot of the people that we work with over the last couple of decades, a pandemic is just their norm. This nothing has changed much for them during this time, and they still expect and desire and require the services that we provide. But how do we pivot? How do we become to strengthen the programs? So as we're having this conversation, I think back to those first early weeks, all the restaurant partners for our food bank were calling and saying, hey, we're not getting anybody coming in. We're shutting down. Can you come pick up all this food and distribute it into the community? So I was driving around all day, picking up food, bringing it back, dropping it off, and making sure that people in the community were getting the food that was out there before it was spoiled, right? And then we started to increase that into the parks because we saw that food insecurity was a real thing. And then disseminating correct information, accurate information, getting people to 211, partnering to get the hand sanitizer and the face masks and all those things out to the community was really a big pivot. But another thing, our workforce really moved from transitioning people that were being unemployed to there were still people out there hiring. So figuring out who was still hiring or how to people to navigate the truths about unemployment and getting all the benefits and how to do those. So there was a lot of pivoting we did within kind of the same buckets of work that we did. We were just pointing people in different directions. But you guys are all right. The community and the partners all came together in a way that was incredible and so fast to get it done.
So like Isaiah, for the Latino community, we've been under attack, it feels like, for at least 15 years. Iowa, we can't forget that we've had the biggest raids in Iowa. There's been several ICE things. So I think it's unfortunate that it's part of our nature to quickly switch and do something and react. And the disparities that existed in the Latino community really were highlighted during the pandemic. We knew that one, information wasn't getting out in Spanish, that the Latino community has been, willfully hidden. There's a lot of mistrust in most organizations. We even heard churches, they were scared to go to their church for help. We knew that was going to be the situation. And so how do we get information out. We did 2 needs assessments, statewide assessments of our families, kind of got a lay of the land from our rural communities to our metro. And then, like Isaiah said, most of our Des Moines families were out of work. And so we need to get them food right away, like now. How are we going to do it? How do we get, funding out for rent or utilities and things like that? And so that that's where we just went.
Yeah, when Isaiah, when you reference this thought of restaurants and some of the service industries were shutting down, and the first calls that they were making were to the nonprofit sector to help leverage that work. And I just keep thinking about how critical the entire sector is to this community's functioning in good times, in times of challenge. And one of the things that I know I see and the Community Foundation sees along with others is the incredible innovation of this sector, the instrumental function that the nonprofit sector plays in community. And to be honest, I don't know that that's always the way that the sector is seen broadly for those who aren't connected daily to the work. So I'd love, for all of you to share some of those examples of innovation. And honestly, they may be some things that you feel like are just the stuff that you do. But what do we want this community to know around innovation during this time that shines a light on the importance of the nonprofit field?
I don't know if this is answering your question actually, but it kind of goes off of what Isaiah was saying earlier. We're serving the most, a lot of our organizations are serving the most vulnerable people in our community, and they cross profit, nonprofit. There was people that were still in kitchens, still cleaning crews, that didn't have safety precautions and weren't getting information out. This is, like you guys said, this is for all of us need to be safe, and regardless of who that person is, we need to make sure everybody's being served and getting information. And so I think that is a shift and an innovation all on its own that has great power.
I think of the teamwork between nonprofits. We pivoted very quickly to make sure that the people within our programs were getting what they need, but we also made an early commitment to, we didn't want our staff to feel burdened by the added weight of, am I going to have a job? Am I going to be able to make a living? Am I going to be able to pay my bills? So we said very early, we're going to keep this thing going, and we're going to leverage our staff to make an impact in other ways. And so, we partnered with Wesley Life to deliver their Meals on Wheels when their volunteers who are more in that risk area couldn't. We partnered with Unity Point and started getting, COVID care boxes with gloves and information in different languages and hand sanitizer, out to the community. We partnered with Unity Point and with United Way on that. And so we started to look at how can we best partner with folks. And then someone else mentioned the for-profit world, which was wonderfully supportive of us. Let's all remember a day where you couldn't walk into any gas station and all they were selling was masks and hand sanitizer. I mean, there was a huge shortage. And so I can remember Graham Construction coming to us and saying, hey, we have N95 masks that we use when we're painting. Can you put these to work to help people? And so that was kind of neat to see some of the innovation around how all the community and all the organization came together. And I know both Renee and Suzanne, along with you, Angie, you guys can talk a lot about that as well, because you were the ones reaching out and connecting and sometimes actually saying, we can help you make this happen. If it's a matter of, funding or expertise, we'll help you. And so to me, that was huge. And it really played a huge role in us navigating through this.
The theme I keep hearing in what you're talking about is sort of this idea about partnerships and this idea about coming together. And sometimes it was at a big scale, like those community circle conversations that we had every Wednesday morning beginning last April with somewhere between 50 and 200 people on a call, just being in community from the nonprofit sector together, to some of those one-on-one conversations, Trey, like you were referencing, or Dawn, I know that Suzanne and I, on behalf of the Disaster Recovery Fund, had a chance to meet with you and 2 other colleagues to learn about where cash resources could be deployed. But I think, underscoring the value of trusting conversations and what that was, what that allowed our community to advance during this time is really important. Cross sectors too. Suzanne, I don't know if you have any recollection.
I remember those Wednesday conversations, and in the middle of this tremendous trauma and fear and sadness and anger, you'd see, just as Trey was describing, someone would say, I have this. Trey was a perfect example. Hey, I've committed to pay my team. I've got people hours. Who needs help? And then that just, it rippled, and everyone, who has this? I have that. Where can I find this out? I know that person. My families need this. Well, we have that, but I need this. And the ripple, and watching that happen, and the ability to just pivot and respond and put service first, not egos first, not territory first, simply service. And it was really inspiring. And if that's not innovation at a Mach speed, I don't know what is.
Well,
yeah, I would echo exactly what you're saying, Suzanne, and Trey, what you referenced. It was probably one of the proudest moments in my career, really, watching that happen, because I think it says a lot about our community. It also says a tremendous amount about the nonprofit sector. And Angie, I'm so glad that you recognized, you kind of spoke to the fact that sometimes our sector isn't always seen as being able to pivot quickly or be resourceful or innovative. And hands down, I think this is a prime example of where that played out time and time again. And the collaborative spirit of our nonprofit network, and just the care and compassion that I think we show, and all of our community partners show to those we serve, but you could see that for each other. And even though there was a lot of uncertainty around my own organization or your organization, that was all kind of set aside. And it was about, how can we help each other get through this? And that is really, was just so inspiring to watch.
I think in many ways, and I know Suzanne said earlier, a lot of people are Zoom tired, right? Or Zoom fatigue. And I think that's true, but I also think that it exposed a lot of disparities with technology, but it also gave us a kind of opportunity to maybe even I know firsthand, to shrink some of that digital divide that was out there, because we started to boost our internet right outside of our walls. We got tablets to give away to people in the community to start to use those things more effectively and efficiently for professional type things. We did a lot of our mental health and our substance abuse treatment via telehealth, which really grew. And now we're even growing more and can serve more people across the state, and even in rural areas, right? So that's really kind of shrinking some of that digital divide that was there out of necessity. And we remember the NA meetings, putting those online. It was a huge curve. And I was in there for the first 5 or 6 meetings, making sure that all the technology was working right. But I think that it really helped people connect in a way that at least stay connected. I mean, it wasn't the best scenario, right? In person with all, but I do think there were some silver linings with some of the digital divide shrinkage that occurred.
And I want to add, I think it's very innovative that Community Foundation, Mid-Iowa Health, and others came to small ethnic-based organizations. Like, I know that, they're going to get it across the, they're huge, right? But to think, what do these small ethnic-based organizations need to survive? And because of you guys coming to us, we were able to give out, we started with a pot of money to give to the community. I think it was maybe 50,000, but that blew into almost $1 million that we gave to the most vulnerable in the Latino community. it started the Compa program where we were able to give services to the kids that are at home, and we knew that they didn't have internet access. We knew they were home alone. Um, and then the Latinx project coming out of that. So by you guys calling me, and so many organizations called and said, what do you need for your community? RACI did, other organizations did. That was a shift in, I think, how Des Moines has operated in the past. And I applaud you guys.
Can I jump on that real quick, Angie? Because I want to just follow up, because Dawn is so right. I think that it also shined a light on these smaller organizations that are super impactful at the grassroots level that no one really knew about before, and how have access to understand the great work that they do. So Dawn is so right. And I think it was a much more equitable distribution of funds throughout the community as well than it has been in the past because of the pandemic and because of the social unrest, right? There were so many things that were piling upon throughout the last year.
When you think about all the community convenings we do around issues, and let's be really frank, for those of us who have the time that we can come to those community meetings, sit around a table, pontificate different things, for most of the people doing the actual work, that hasn't been an option to leave delivering a service or being on the front lines of delivering to our community, to stop and come to community conversations. And so while the digital divide was vast in many areas, for our nonprofit communities, it allowed small organizations, frontline service providers to jump on an hour call or 45-minute call on Wednesday morning, and you got to know people, even though it was over a screen. It was like, oh, I need to follow up with him. She needs to know where we can get this. I've never met that person. I clearly need to know who they are and what they're doing. So it allowed more people to participate in community action conversations than we've ever seen before.
Well, and I was just thinking too about, from the perspective of the Disaster Recovery Fund, when our community established the concept for that, which is the fund that Dawn was referencing that helped to spur on what became over $1 million investment in our community. But the Disaster Recovery Fund was imagined with almost 80 different partners throughout our community saying, if and when there's another disaster, because it was spurred after the flooding of 2018, what would we want to consider and how would we want to focus one collective pool? And, we really were able to double down on the health and economic impacts to the most vulnerable in our community. And there was a commitment from organizations of, from all different sectors. I mean, I remember there were faith-based organizations, there were emergency management officials, there was, the Animal Rescue League, there was, all of our entities were engaged in those things. And, that was the collective response, is if we're going to pool money together to make an impact, that's going to be the focus. We're going to find the most vulnerable in our community. And we're going to do that by creating trusting relationships to learn about the impacts on the ground. So, Dawn, I certainly appreciate, the recognition or the acknowledgement of, that conversation. And Suzanne and I happen to be the ones on behalf of Disaster Recovery Fund to meet with you. But, it was such a community commitment out of the gate. And those initial funders in to launch, we put funding in from our Better Together Fund to launch that. I mean, I'm looking at United Way and Mid-Iowa Health Foundation and the county and others pooled. That was the community commitment. And I was so excited to see that start to blossom. But I also think there's a ton more work that we need to be doing as we kind of continue to emerge. So in that sort of lens, I'd be really curious, what are the things that really need to stick? What are those lessons that we've learned that, we better not forget these things, Central Iowa? I'd love your reflections on those.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I have thought a lot about, and I know Suzanne and Angie and I have had, countless conversations about this, over the course of the last year, but and I think we've always been collaborative. I think we come from a community where collaboration is certainly a value. But I think, and Dawn spoke to this earlier, it was also our opportunity to really start to ensure that we were listening to the right voices, and that we weren't making assumptions about what the needs were, or we weren't making assumptions about what the solution should be, but rather we were really being very intentional about having conversations with organizations and individuals that were really serving those that are the most vulnerable in our community. And I hope that we continue to have that kind of collaboration as we go forward. I think that is something that I'm really hopeful about, and I think is necessary. And I think we've started down the path of that. But it's definitely one of those lessons and one of those things that I think we want to make sure sticks, and we don't lose sight of that going forward.
I would agree with that. One of the other pieces that it's made me very self-aware of is, the mental health well-being. I think Isaiah mentioned it. You have a population of people that COVID for us was like a game changer, throw our lives upside down. And you have a population of people that just had to navigate through and deal with this as just, item 6 on their list of 150 stressors that they're dealing with. And so hopefully we can maintain some of the momentum and certainly supporting those populations, and making sure that, in some ways I hate to be the person that says this, but in some ways I think almost we had kind of the easier job was when it all hit, was at its peak, and we were all just saying, just do your best, right? Now it's, how do we re-engage? How do we start to get back to supporting the individuals we serve in an ongoing basis? How do we engage with them when half the population's been vaccinated and half was not? It was really easy when we said the best for everything is we just do everything on the phone or telehealth. And so I think maintaining some of that momentum and really making sure that this isn't just a temporary blip of unity because of the pandemic will be really, really important, and I'm hopeful it's something that can be maintained.
I was looking at statistics and for Polk County, and by 2050, it's going to be 1 out of 5 Des Moines people will be Latino. But oftentimes they're not at many of these decision-making tables. We don't have enough leaders in the community. I hope the Latinx Project will kind of alleviate that. But when we had money to give out, many of the rural communities surrounding the metro, there is no organization that they could go to, or a person that's there that people could get information from. And so making sure that there's leadership, equitable leadership across Des Moines and across Iowa is extremely important. And that it's time that we start really reconsidering our English only laws, because it's a matter of life and death. And it's just not, we have 126 languages, I think, spoken in Des Moines public schools. And if those families can't get information, like we're driving a couple Swahili students that speak Swahili, the parents didn't get any information. And I know DMPS does a great job, but there's still huge gaps where people don't know how to sign up their kids for online versus at home learning. Like, we need to start making sure Des Moines is diversifying, and we need to make sure it's equitable information is spread.
That was something that we certainly, heard, and Dawn, I appreciate you amplifying that too, because, even through the disaster recovery fund, there was a lot of conversation around, the difference between access and true knowledge and comfort, and what that looks like, and how you provide the type of explanation of a vaccination, for example, within appropriate context. And, I think back, one of the investments that the Disaster Recovery Fund made was to support hiring, contracting through the health department with individuals specifically from diverse communities to help talk about. And, there was a 10-minute video in Swahili specifically to address questions, but that's not to say that there's been an answer, but I think it's to say that we know that it's a need and that it's, we need to be doing better in those areas. And, Trey, what you were talking about is, this is one stressor among 150. And, I always am so grateful for that reminder. And Isaiah, you've done such a great job of, continuously telling our community this is yet another thing. Curious about, what do we do about that? What additional action can the sector do to continue that critical conversation? We're not going back to normal isn't a place that I think any of us are really interested. I mean, it's what is that new, better normal for our whole community? So what advice do you have for all of us and the folks on this call? How do we move forward?
I'll jump in. I think Renee and Suzanne both had talked about it, and I think we've all talked about it a little bit, but we kind of went from theory, or this will help our community in 5 years or 10 years down the road by doing this project or doing that, but to who's doing what now and how can we support that? And how can we continue to convene on a quarterly basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis to continue to see what those needs are and how we can fill those gaps and support those organizations or people or places that are out there doing it. So I know some people were like quarterly reports to United Way, but I think quarterly, because you could think, right? You can see the progress though, right? You can really like it. I think we just did move from theory to practice, and I don't want to move too far away to go back to theory. This will help in 10 years versus practice. This is what we need right now. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you said that, Isaiah, and I promise we're not going to make you do the quarterly reports anymore going forward. But
this is being recorded. I'm just going to warn
But the value of that, to your point, was to get that real-time information to say what's happening right now. What are all of you as nonprofit rock stars facing in terms of challenges, and what are the gaps of the individuals that you're serving? And I think I want to take one step back to something that Isaiah said a moment ago too, and I think Angie, you kind of referenced this, but that one thing I hope we don't forget is that the systems that were broken before or that were maybe recognized during the pandemic were broken before the pandemic. And these are things that just because the pandemic happened doesn't mean that they're new or that people weren't struggling before the pandemic, because they were. And I think that what the pandemic has done though is it has shone a light on it in a way that has changed the conversation, and I hope will help us remember that these are not going to be things that we're going to be able to change in this next year, but we can't forget that the systems still need work, and we can meet the immediate needs, and that's important and critical, but we still, as a nonprofit sector, as a community, as for-profit leaders, have to really step up and say, hey, what can we do about those systems that we now more clearly understand have been historic and systemically broken, and want to make sure that those get the attention that they need.
I hope one other thing, sorry, Angie, one other thing that I've been thinking a lot about in my board, we've had lots of conversations, and Isaiah sits on my board, so he can attest to this or chime in, but midway through this crisis, we removed the word vulnerable from our mission statement with intent, because we often refer to members of our community, and we've done it here today. I do it naturally, right? As vulnerable. And what we've witnessed in a way, I'm sad to say never before, is quite the opposite of that, right? The knowledge and the resources exist for anyone in our community that's closest to the issues themselves. And so they're not the most vulnerable, they're the most resilient individuals in our community. And they have a heck of a lot to teach us collectively about where even the issues exist. Where are the systems broken? What is it we should be doing completely differently than we've done before? And for those of us who show up with voices and places of privilege, venturing out for some real, authentic, trusting relationships. And we've got a lot of work to do in that space. If we're going to really hear the voices of those who know best, we have to show up differently. And that's going to be, I hope that's something we don't lose ever. And I hope it's something we focus in with incredible passion and intent and humility around. And then the other thing I would say I hope we don't lose is how we collectively as a community, strong organizations matter. The work that Trey, Isaiah, and Dawn are doing in our community, we need financially strong organizations. We need strong leadership and pipelines of leadership in these organizations. And we typically, as funders, we fund these shiny objects out here that are doing good. I mean, it's not that they're not good things, but have we thought about how to make the organizations strong themselves? And can we have a long-term commitment to not underselling our entire nonprofit sector, to do this, but do it for 10 cents on the dollar because you figured out historically how to do that? I mean, that's not good enough anymore. And I think we need a bigger reality check. And we, along with any other funder, we have a lot of work to do in that space. So I hope we hold each other accountable for that. And I'm glad it's recorded.
Those things give me goosebumps. I love that reflection, Suzanne. There's so many things that are stirring in my mind right now. The first thing I want to go back to the change in terminology that you called out, which I think is so powerful and really a moment of reflection that anyone could be doing, including the donors on this call. And I loved the voice that you gave to saying vulnerable, they're really the most resilient. And
where did we go for the disaster recovery fund to know where we put our financial resources that we knew that was going to have the best result and the greatest impact? We went to the core of our community and asked, what do you need? Yep. No strings attached. Yep. We didn't know. So in our most helpless moment, we didn't know what we could do, where we could do the most good. So that should be a lesson, not just in a mode of crisis, but holistically, that's where we should go to seek true knowledge.
Absolutely. I love that. And I think that also, considering the concept of this whole call is DonorConnect and what could that do? I mean, for the donors who are listening on the call, that's a lesson that can continuously be lifted up and elevated. Reach out. I learn, ask, hear, and know that the answers lie in the work on the ground. I mean, that's where the answers are. Another thing that certainly was discussed was related to just general operating support. So in funder verbiage, that's what that means. But it basically means, here's a donation, do good work with it. So you can call it unrestricted or undesignated or discretionary, whatever you want to call it. but investing in the people to have the nimble resources to execute where they need to. So whether it's, Trey supporting the work of keeping his staff team engaged and leaning into, innovative partnerships. I mean, Trey's organization stepped in to help another nonprofit when they were slammed with derecho response. I mean, there are countless examples with the folks on the call. Same thing with Isaiah. I mean, never shutting down, always leaning in. You had in social unrest. I mean, I would text Isaiah in the middle of the night. I was worried about just his own personal health, making sure. I mean, there's dedication here. So I think that unrestricted funding is a great lesson for all of us, and in particular the donor community. And the other thing that I can't miss saying, and Dawn, I will defer to you.
It's okay. You're right.
But is this idea about doing more with less. So one phrase that I know, I've said numerous times, Christine Else, our president, has said numerous times, and I would love for all of you on this call to practice saying, is nonprofit is a tax status, not a business model. And we need to have that understood cross community. We need to recognize the critical, functioning, social service critical businesses that our nonprofits are. Find access to capital, support them by making innovative investments. That we cannot continue to starve this part of our community with resources they need to serve everybody. Dawn.
Well, and Angie, if I can just add, when we think about the individuals on this call, another way to another call to action really is around advocacy, because one of the prime examples that I think about over this past year was when the state offered the small business grants and they made it exclusive to for-profits, and nonprofits were excluded in the initial round. And it was, conversations that we were having with our nonprofit partners that were saying, wait a second, that's federal funds that are coming down through the state for small businesses to kind of stay afloat. And why are nonprofits not part of that equation? And we had to bring a group together to say, this is just not acceptable anymore for nonprofits to be seen as, you guys can pick yourselves up and figure it out. But rather, and luckily we were successful in the second round, but there were still a lot of restrictions on it. And not everyone was eligible for it. But that, exactly what you're saying is somewhere where we can really use more voices, that in every system that nonprofits are seen as a critical cog in the wheel, and that we need to be resourced in a way that doesn't exclude us or doesn't leave out those that are serving individuals who are struggling.
Your advocacy reminded me, Ron, one on the call today to mention, legislative opportunities. So I'm going to turn it back to you. I think I was on a roll, so I didn't mean to cut you off, Dawn.
Oh, me? Well, I just wanted to go back to Suzanne, what she said, and I think that equity amongst nonprofits, it really did come down to relationships that were already established, and it came down to trust. And for the fact that the disaster fund wasn't all of a sudden I had to write, 10,000 characters in a page, but I trust you. I know who you're serving. I know what you're doing, and go do it. And that makes, for a lot of us really small nonprofits, it makes the world a difference, because I haven't been able to fundraise this year, and but I'm going to keep giving services until the door's shut, and so having people come in and say, we respect what you're doing and we want to support what you're doing, because if you're not there, there really isn't anybody else who's there. So I know that a lot of smaller nonprofits are really grateful for that type of funding, where it's like, I'm not going to make you go through a month-long process to get this done, but we know what you're doing and we respect it. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
I want to
That was even,
go ahead, Trey. Sorry.
oh, please. I think that was even critical with funding for programming, not just new COVID related, but United Way is incredibly supportive of us, and a lot of the programs that they fund are based on get into the homes. These are the outcomes we need to see. This is exactly what needs to happen. And when this hit, we couldn't have asked for a better partner that said, we know you're going to do good things. We know you have to do them in a different way. Just make sure you're helping people and continue to do what you're doing. And that, that was imperative. I mean, that's what allowed us to keep going. That's what allowed us to keep people employed. So we didn't just add to the problem of more people being unemployed. And so I would echo that in spades across the whole continuum.
And I agree with what Angie said about it's just a tax status, not a business model, right? So we need to really help young, newer, and even Urban Dreams. We didn't have an Endow Iowa account until the last 2 years, right? I mean, so having small organizations understand what it's going to take to be sustainable over time to continue to do this work, even past the founder or the current staff is crucial. And I think there's a lot of opportunities out there with things like the back room at the Community Foundation, right? It's been great for us. Endow Iowa accounts, things like that for sustainability.
Well, I know. Thanks, Isaiah. I know we're coming up on our hour, and honestly, I just have so many more questions. But I want to express such gratitude to each of you on the call today. Hopefully, for those of you who have joined us, you have gotten a glimpse of the passion and the compassion that all of these individuals have for our community and for those that they serve. We are in a far better place because of their leadership. I am certain of that. There is also a lot more work to do, and that I am also certain of. And it's going to take a lot of people, and it's going to take a heck of a lot of collaboration, and the type that's authentic, not superficial. So please lean into those conversations. Learn how to trust the organizations that work in the spaces that you care about. Because that is critical. That will be critical as we emerge, and it's going to be critical because there's going to be something else big that our community is going to face. I'm going to turn this back to Sarah, and before I do that, though, I just want to say, this type of conversation and reflection, especially related to the Disaster Recovery Fund, will come out in the form of kind of a report back and a letter to our community. So please know the Community Foundation, along with Mid-Iowa Health, United Way, Polk County, and Nationwide, and others who've been supportive of that effort, will be releasing that soon. So you will have, again, some more reflections, and I think probably more conversations with the others that you see here. So thanks again, and Sarah, thanks for the time and allowing us to have the conversation.
Yeah, and just to follow up with that, Angie, on the Disaster Recovery Fund, I loved Suzanne's quote on, going out into the community and saying, what are these needs? No strings attached, we'll support you. That's incredible, and that's really how we are better together. And as I close today, I'd love to lift up givedsm.org, which is our community's online resource to connect donors with timely needs of our nonprofit community, like these great nonprofits we've had on the call today. You can support the projects on GiveDSM by credit card or by recommending a grant directly from your charitable giving fund. And I'm happy to help you with that as well. Also, we do have our next DonorConnect on the books. It's going to be called Estate Planning at Any Life Stage, and it is by the fabulous local consultant, Johnny Hayes. This will be on June 10th, and this will be a deep dive for all ages. So think about bringing your adult children or even your teenage children to this event to talk about what you need to know for the future and having your affairs in order. Again, thank you to our speakers. This was incredible to hear from you all and what you've done over the last year and moving forward. And thank you to you, our donors, for being with us. We look forward to continued conversations. Have a wonderful day.